vinyl community? This is Tommy in North Carolina, and happy 2018, everyone. And per the questions that were sent to me, I'm going to participate in the 2018 vinyl tag. Now, some of these things I've already answered, and some of them I haven't. But either way, I'm going to have a little fun with this. I hope you guys enjoy it. And here we go with the vinyl tag 2018 for the vinyl community. So the first question is a channel that I first remember seeing in the VC. And I really don't know, but I'm going to go ahead and give a quick answer. It was probably Mean Mr. Mayo. Being a Beatles fan, I'd heard a few things about him and had checked out probably a couple of his videos before I really knew what the vinyl community was. And I lurked around, so there's several of you that I remember seeing quite early on, which is cool because I've interacted with a lot of you and got to know some of you, which is really, really cool, before I really knew what I was going to get into when I started doing this. But definitely I'm going to go with Mean Mr. Mayo as my first VC video. It may or may not have been, but I'm certain that he was probably one of my earliest subscribers. So, Mean Mr. Mayo. Next question is favorite record I discovered via VC in a video. You know what? That's a hard one to answer, so I'm going to get some miles out of this one, and I'm going to go with this recent one, and you probably saw the video that I did on this. XTC's Mummer. This was a VCLT sent from Jay Party, including the note, which I kept in there. But listen to it. Really love this album and love this band, so I'm looking forward to getting into more of their stuff. So this is just one that was kind of fresh on my mind, and one that I definitely discovered via the VC. So thanks again, Jeff. Really awesome, and you provided me with one of my very favorite LPs that I've currently have. So awesome. So the next question is some other hobbies that I may have, and as you can see behind me, and probably not really a hobby as much anymore because of streaming services like Netflix and Filmstruck and things like that, but I'm a big fan of film and movies, and so for a long time I collected a lot of DVDs and things like that, and as you can see I have a few. Another thing I enjoy doing are these little Funko Pop figures. Now this is, in particular, this is the Twin Peaks one, and I don't really collect all the Funko Pops because it's too expensive and I'd rather be buying records, but I do have all of these Twin Peaks figures. This is the Laura Palmer figure. I'm a big fan of Twin Peaks, so you might could say I collect Twin Peaks stuff, but that might be another hobby. Twin Peaks and David Lynch films, I don't know. Other hobbies. So the next question is, why did I start to collect? Well, that's hard to say because I really have always been a music fan, even when I was a little kid, and I got into bands like Kiss, and then as the 80s went on, I got into bands like AC/DC and things like that in junior high school. But I was a trombone player in junior high and into high school, and really took it seriously, and I got into more sort of serious music, quote unquote, and I was a music major at Delta State, and I studied with this guy right here, Dr. Edward Barr, who was the low brass professor at Delta State. And Dr. Barr was a record collector, which I thought was interesting. And every year we would have a get-together at his house. He would do a low brass picnic, and he'd cook for the low brass studio. And part of the fun after we ate and played something called sudden death croquet, we would get a tour of the house and get to see the record and CD collection. And I realized, wow, adults can do this too, and collecting recordings. And Dr. Barr incidentally wrote a discography on low brass and trombone music. But just as a throwback, since I've got this open, that's the jazz band at Delta State, and there is yours truly right there, throwback. I was also in Phi Mu Alpha Symphonia, and you can see me in this picture. Where am I at? I'm in this picture somewhere. At least I think I am. Yes, I am in that picture. Sorry about that. I am right there, that gentleman. Me. Anyway, Delta State University, this is 1995, several years ago. But Dr. Barr, I largely credit with getting me into collecting, and even though he did largely classical music and things like that, but he had quite the impressive record collection, still does, and knows quite a bit. So Dr. Barr, wherever you are, I hope you're well, and I know that you're retired and happy, but you influenced this guy probably not as much in my playing as the ability to collect. Do I play an instrument or am I in a band? That's really a hard question to answer. I'm not sure. As you can tell from the last question, I started out as a trombone player. My dad always told me that I needed to learn piano if I really wanted to know music, and he was probably right. But as I got in college at Delta State, my good friend Danny McGregor, who was also a music major and trumpet major, he wanted to start a band, and he didn't have anybody to play in a band, but he knew I loved music, and so he handed me, well, actually I played a little bit of drums, not very well, but some drums, but I realized quickly that I wasn't really good enough to play in a band, so he handed me a bass guitar, and funny enough, bass is very similar to trombone in the sense that the roles that it plays within a group, and so I thought it was really cool that he believed in me enough that he said, oh, you can play bass, and sure enough, I picked it up. And Danny and I started playing together in a band called Lately David, and so have I been in a band? Yes, Lately David. And I wanted to write songs, and Danny had been writing songs for a few years by that point, but I wanted to start writing songs, and I was writing on a piano at the time, but I quickly realized that all the beautiful chords that I was playing on piano didn't translate well into guitar songs, and so I picked up the guitar and started playing it. So I wouldn't say that I'm an accomplished guitarist by any means, but I can strum quite a few chords, and I do write songs and sing a little bit. I don't currently play in a band. When I moved to North Carolina from Mississippi, I kind of had to call kaputs to Lately David, but Lately David's really the only band I've ever been in, and I consider Danny to be really kind of the only musical partner I've ever had. But I miss that a lot, and I need to get out and start playing again, just some solo shows. I don't know that I want to be in another band, but I do enjoy playing and have quite a good time doing it. But yes, I do play instruments, and I have been in a band. Have I ever worked in a record store? I live in a record store. No, in all seriousness, one of the first jobs I ever had was working at a mall in Georgia, Camelot Music. And that's where I met my friend Sean in New Orleans. Hi, Sean. But it was funny enough, we worked at the Camelot in Athens, Georgia, where he went to school. And so we met there. And then years later, I took a part-time job at Bebop Music in Jackson, Mississippi, which was one of my favorite places ever. And I worked there for a few years and really enjoyed it. Got to know a lot of great people. And also, it certainly helped my record collecting at the time. Favorite album from the year that I was born? Not too hard to pick out, but Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks. So you probably know by now, I was born in 1975. This is probably one of Bob's greatest albums, and not to mention, it's a great album anyway. But easily my favorite from the year I was born, Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks. Classic record I've never heard, and I had to think about that for a while, and I've got some books about some records. There's probably a lot of classic records I've never heard, but what I did is I went through my stack of records that I've not listened to yet, some things that I've bought, and one in particular that I've not listened to that I've had for a couple of years now, I just haven't got around to listening to it, is the Moby Grape album. I think it's from 1969. Wow, is that the name of it? Maybe you Moby Grape fans can help. I came into a stack of Moby Grape LPs, and this is one of them, and I just have not listened to it. I just picked it up. I'd heard good things about it. Skip Spence, I think. I've heard numerous things about that guy creatively, but this is an album that I own, but it's classic, but I've never heard it. Moby Grape fans, let me know what I'm missing. I'll probably listen to it very soon now. Guilty pleasure record. This one's kind of easy for me. I've been a fan of Lady Gaga for a while, which my wife thinks is hilarious. But I do like Lady Gaga. I think she's great. But easily my guilty pleasure record is the Boston first album. This album has been played to death on classic rock radio. And it's made the rounds, and you've probably heard every single song on it at least 5 billion times. But as an album, I absolutely love this record, top to bottom. I play it, and it sounds good. And this is a recent find that I had, and I want to say it is indeed mastered by Capitol Wally, so it's got the good mastering on it. But I absolutely love the Boston first album. Anything after this, I don't care for, but this one album is pure gold for me. Strangest record, that's a really good question, and I did a video a while back on oddball records and probably featured this in the oddball set, but I'll go with this one just because this is the first one that popped to mind. It's a Third Man Records release Why the Mountains Are Black. This is primeval Greek village music from the early 20th century. It's absolutely just a nutty record. And I remember playing it the first time, and my wife upstairs was scared to death. She's like, what is he playing down there? This is really intriguing music. I like a lot of odd type stuff, and I'm kind of drawn to it, bad album covers and so on and so forth. But this is definitely a strange album, and this is one you could probably crank up and drive the neighbors away because they would wonder what's going on in that house. But Why the Mountains Are Black from Third Man Records, primeval Greek village music, 1907 to 1960. Show a picture disc. I don't do picture discs. As a matter of fact, I've given quite a few away. But I do have one that I got, and I actually played it recently. This was a recent kind of find. I say recent. I got it this past year. Paul McCartney's We All Stand Together, which is the Rupert and the Frog song animated short. Now, I watched these animated shorts with my daughter back when they came out on DVD, and she was still quite little, and we love these little cartoons. But this is one from the early 80s. We All Stand Together, Paul McCartney and the Frog chorus, and on the other side is We All Stand Together, the humming version, Paul McCartney and the Finchley Frogettes. This was actually produced by George Martin, but this was a little single he did, a little children's song that Paul McCartney did, and it is indeed a picture disc with the glare. Best posthumous release. Now that's a tough one, and I gave it some consideration and some thought, and one really kept coming back to my mind. And being a big fan of Big Star and that whole story and the music there, I went with Chris Bell's I Am the Cosmos. Now, Chris Bell was one of the founding members of Big Star along with Alex Chilton. Most of you probably know the story, but Chris, after the failure, the commercial failure of that first Big Star album, Chris kind of drifted away into obscurity. Now, his family owned restaurants in the Memphis area, Danvers, and so there's famous stories about how Chris managed one of the restaurants. He kind of got out of the music business, but he did record. This is the Four Men with Beards version, which I understand is not the best, but Chris did sort of record off and on throughout the rest of the 70s until he was killed in a car crash. But Chris Bell never really got to observe any kind of success or any of the recognition he deserved as not only one of the founding members of Big Star, but in his solo career. But this is one that came out after he died. He'd only done one real solo single, the great I Am the Cosmos, which is a fantastic song. And anybody that really kind of gets into the Big Star story, a lot of the focus is on Alex Chilton, because Alex was kind of already an established star by the time he got into the band and so on and so forth. But if you love the first Big Star album and you love that sort of clean power pop melodic stuff, this Chris Bell is definitely the way to go, because if you get to the later Big Star stuff where Alex Chilton takes more control and the songs get loose and more ragged and just rough around the edges, you can tell Chris Bell was really the glue that held that band together. And this album is really the proof. Now, there's some of the songs on here that are just okay, but in terms of just fascinating and just an interesting figure in rock history, and really not a whole lot is known about him, just personally, I kind of call him the Robert Johnson of pop. It's just there's just so little out there about him and so few that really knew him. But Chris Bell, I Am the Cosmos, best posthumous release for me. Artists that I impulsively collect. Now, there's a few of them. I have this thing about Michael Nesmith records. I always look for them, and I usually buy them when I see them, which is a little bit sickening because I have everything. But one that first came to mind here is Lee Hazelwood. And I've done some videos on Lee, and I'm threatening to do like a full-blown Lee Hazelwood video, but my friend Sean in New Orleans and I have a bit of a thing. When we see Lee, we buy Lee, just because you don't see a lot of Lee Hazelwood in the wild. But overall, if it's got Lee Hazelwood's name on it, I try to buy it and find it. Even some of the records he produced and his name's on. But Lee Hazelwood's an artist that I impulsively collect. But there's probably a few that fall in there: the Beatles, Neil Young, people like that. But this is the one I picked to answer the question. Best blind buy. I've got a few that I've had success with, but this is a recent one that I grabbed, and it was really on a sort of suggestion. But I was at Harvest Records in Asheville a few months ago and ran into Greg Cartwright. Some of you know Greg from the Raining Sound, the Oblivions, Memphis guy. But he had showed me this record that was in the new arrival bin, Smith Perkins Smith, which I had not heard and didn't know anything about. It's on the Island label. And the connection was that Terry Manning, Memphis guy, did the remix on this album. Now, Smith Perkins Smith is Steve Smith, Wayne Perkins, and Tim Smith, along with Barry Beckett actually plays on this album. Some of you know Barry Beckett from the Muscle Shoals stuff with Bob Dylan. So there's quite a few good people, but this is a really wonderful record, and I don't ever see anybody talk about it, so I had no idea what it was, but you will be pleasantly surprised. It's a good sort of folksy pop rock album, just good sounding songs, good melodies, excellent harmonies. Just top to bottom, this is a fantastic record, and it was a blind buy. I had no idea who they were or anything about it, but if you ever see the Smith Perkins Smith album out in the wild, I think you'll be very happy to pick it up, especially if you find it at a really good price. But blind buy, and a really good blind buy. I did a recent video on blind spot artists, and what I'm guessing is this is somebody that's kind of been around and somebody that probably should be on your radar. We just talked about XTC recently, which is somebody that's kind of coming into focus for me. But this is another one that I've talked about, Bruce Cockburn, and of course this is the album Dancing in the Dragon's Jaws. Listening to these Bruce Cockburn albums really has shown me a whole new sort of level of good songwriting, and I know that Bruce has been around for a very, very long time and has put out a lot of music, but Bruce is one of those that I've just recently kind of discovered, and I'm kind of kicking myself for not being a fan of this music any sooner than I have been. But this is my blind spot artist, Bruce Cockburn from Canada. Favorite album cover of all time? I'm guessing there's several that I love, and it's hard to pick just one, but there is one that I always go back to as a favorite because it really made me buy the album and then fall in love with the artist. It is the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. This is an album back when I was working at Camelot Music. I kept seeing in the racks and the CD racks, and I knew about Bob Dylan and was familiar with who he was and his importance, but I didn't know a whole lot about, I didn't know any of his recordings, and I kept asking people, where should I start with Bob Dylan? Of course, the easy answer was greatest hits and everything, but I kept picking this up and saying, there's something going on here. This album cover just spoke to me that they're in the snow. It looks very cold. I mean, Susie Rotolo, obviously deeply in love with this guy. The title, just everything about this record cover just screamed at me until I finally bought it. And I remember buying the album and on CD and putting it on and listening to it in my vehicle on my way from the store to the house. It was a good 40-minute drive at least. And so the songs came on, and starting with Blowing in the Wind, which I kind of knew, but Masters of War, Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. This album just kept pounding me with these sort of brilliant songs, and then it hit me just how great Bob Dylan is and why I should appreciate him more. So this album cover just has always spoken to me, and it's probably just my short answer for favorite album cover. It's the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. I'm going to cheat with the next one, a musician that I've met, but most of you know about my love for Michael Nesmith. Here I am with Michael Nesmith. Obviously, I've met him and got a few signed things. But I met Nesmith at an after show in Birmingham, Alabama. It was a meet and greet, and so it was a big deal to meet Nesmith. But the story's not as interesting as the one I'm about to tell, so I have two for this one. So the interesting story of a musician that I've met, this goes back to the mid-2000s. Elvis Costello had recorded in Oxford, Mississippi. He'd recorded his album, The Delivery Man. And I got to see him at one of the club dates in Memphis when he did that little small show. But he did a tour behind The Delivery Man. And I'd gone to New Orleans to see my friend Sean, and we were going to go to the show. So that day we were in downtown New Orleans just kind of hanging out and doing our thing. And there was a store in New Orleans called the Magic Bus. Fans of the Magic Bus, comment below. Let me know if you remember that place. It was run by an English guy called Lippy. That's what they called him. But that day we had gone in there, and I bought a few Elvis Costello records to have just because I didn't have them on vinyl. I bought a couple of them. And so we were walking around downtown in New Orleans around the French Quarter, and we had gone into the Virgin Megastore that was still there. This is pre-Katrina. And we'd gone in there, and if you remember in New Orleans, the Virgin Megastore was like 3 stories. And I was looking for DVDs. So I had got on the escalator and ridden up the escalator to the 2nd floor to find the DVDs. And as I was going up the escalator, I looked over and saw the DVD racks on the 1st floor. So I immediately got back on the escalator to go back down. As I'm going down, I look over to my left, and riding up the escalator is Elvis Costello. And I'm looking around like, does he have an entourage? What's going on? Is he here for a signing? You know, what's happening? You don't just walk down the street or walk into a store and there's Elvis. And so I went down to the 1st floor, kind of looked for Sean. I couldn't find him. And I said, you know what? This is my opportunity. This is my chance. So I got up to the 2nd floor, and there in the jazz section, flipping through the CDs, Elvis Costello, All Alone. I go up to the counter where the guy's standing there, and I said, do you have a Sharpie? And then he kind of said, is that? I'm like, yes, it is. It just so happened, because I'd been at the store, I had a couple of Elvis Costello records, including this one, Get Happy, which is one of my favorite Elvis Costello records. Anyway, so I grabbed the Sharpie, grabbed the record, walk up to Elvis. He had some earbuds in. I probably was completely disturbing him. But he shook my hand, and we discussed recording in Oxford for a minute. I told him I'd seen him in Memphis. And, of course, he scrawled his famous ineligible Elvis Costello scrawl, which I wouldn't even know who that was if I had not seen him sign it myself. But this is the real deal. I said, thank you so much. I'll see you tonight, which I did. I was actually on the front row. And got downstairs, rode the escalator, and saw Sean, pulled out the other record I had, which was an Armed Forces, gave it to him. I said, 2nd floor, go now. And he was sort of like, is it, you're kidding? I said, go. And I didn't want to go up there and be like, just kind of following him around. I didn't want to be that guy. He was gracious and very kind. Sean went up, got the autograph as well, came back downstairs. And as we left, Elvis had bought a stack of CDs and was leaving the store, and we were kind of walking up Canal back probably to his hotel, and we were behind him, which we really, honest to goodness, we were not following Elvis Costello around New Orleans. We just happened to be behind him. And it was kind of a funny story, because there was a mother and daughter who were walking toward us, and we were several feet behind Elvis. And as they walked by, the daughter went, that's Elvis Costello, to her mother, and the mother said, who? So there's a little perspective on it. But and I actually have got a couple of other Elvis autographs, a few other shows that I'd been to and met him, and I actually have Steve Naive and Pete Thomas as well on some signed records. But this is the one where I met him in New Orleans, kind of in a personal setting, and he was very gracious to me, because he could have easily blown me off, but he didn't. But like I said, I've been lucky enough to meet quite a few musicians and a few famous ones. But Roger McGuinn from the Byrds, I got to meet him. And like I said, quite a few. But my Elvis Costello story, I think, is probably the most entertaining, and thought I'd share that with you. Record with sentimental value. This is one that I've shown before, but it's worth showing again because it probably has the most sentimental value to me. The Beatles' Blue Album, 1967 to 70. This is the album that made me fall in love with the Beatles, and it probably really kind of created a spark that sent me on the journey that I'm on now. But funny enough, this is the album that I listened to, and I'll just tell this quickly again. This was the album that I listened to. My family had gone on a vacation and had visited a good friend of mine, or a friend of my mom's, Carol. And Carol lived in Ardmore, Tennessee, still does. And she had this album, and I spent a lot of that week with headphones on, listening on her turntable to this album. Well, several years ago, Carol got rid of her records, but she left me in charge of them. And when she did, this was the album. And so why this is sentimental is because this is the actual album, the LP. This is the one that I spent that summer listening to over and over again and made me fall in love with the Beatles. I don't think you could get much more sentimental than that. So this is probably the most sentimental album in my collection. Favorite album no one seems to know about. Now, this is an album that I always go to, and I get a hard time for it. And there's been some discussions here in the VC about it. But this is an album that has inspired me on several levels. I always say that I wouldn't even be a songwriter if it weren't for this album. But it is Pete Townshend's All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes. Now, Empty Glass is the Pete Townshend album that a lot of people go to because it has, a couple of hits on it. This was the album that came after that. Apparently, it came after some drug rehab and everything. Pete kind of went wild in his later years, particularly after Keith Moon died. But on the Atco label, I think it came out in '82. But this album is it just inspires me, and I don't know what it was. I know there's a short film you can find here on YouTube concerning this album, but more than any Who record or anything else, this is the album that made me fall in love with Pete Townshend. The lyrics are kind of obscure and poetic. It's an '80s sounding album for sure. But it definitely just is one of those albums that it doesn't rank on high list, and even Pete Townshend fans are kind of mixed about it. They felt like it was a little pretentious and overreaching on his part, and not as accessible as some of his other stuff. But to me, just as a personal album, this is like a Pet Sounds for me. This is just an album that I go to, and I just... it speaks to my soul on so many levels. So Pete Townshend's All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes. And finally, favorite album from a genre that I don't know that well. Now this I had to actually do quite a bit of thinking and soul searching on. People that know me well. I'm not a fan of new age music. It gives me a headache. It's terrible. And I probably have a couple of records by artists that may be considered new agey. I've discussed them, the Michael Nesmith video. He did some new agey type stuff. But after thinking about it and really giving it some considerable thought, I'm not well versed in the genre of African American gospel music. It's just a far-reaching genre that goes back several years, and I don't know a whole lot about it. Now, I know Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace, which I think is a phenomenal album, but this is an album that I actually do love quite a bit, and it just is a great gospel record. It's Andre Crouch and the Disciples live in London. Now, Andre Crouch is very famous, wrote several songs that are even in probably your church hymnal. But this is an album that came out in the late 70s. He had done a world tour. It's a double set on the Light label. And just smoking arrangements. I mean, it's a lot of upbeat stuff. Now, it's a little churchy in places because Andre preaches a little bit, but musically speaking, I mean, the horns and the background vocals and some of these arrangements just really, really cook. I used to work in a bookstore where we'd usually open every morning and play this album right off the bat just to kind of get our spirits up and get us going. But this is an album that's out there and definitely worth seeking out. A gospel album, Andre Crouch and the Disciples. Now, there's a lot of Jesus music from the 70s, bands like Glass Harp and Phil Keaggy, people like that I really do like a lot. And there's some that I need to get into, bands like Daniel Amos and things like that I've got some people that have been pointing me toward. Really, really good stuff. But this is just a genre that's like almost a black hole for me. But Andre Crouch and the Disciples live in London is just funky fun and upbeat, and just it's a smoking record all the way through. So those are my vinyl tags that were sent to me, and answering all the questions. I'm going to add one more, and this is kind of jumping off a discussion going back to the beginning of XTC being a band that I'm kind of discovering and getting into, and probably throughout the year you're going to see me getting more and more XTC records. It's going to be kind of my goal is to seek those out. But another artist, and so this is kind of a tag-on bonus that I'm doing, another artist that I'm seeking out in 2018 is Thin Lizzy. I only have this one album, Johnny the Fox. I like it a whole lot. But I don't see a lot of Thin Lizzy around where I am, but just one of those artists that I'm going to be actively seeking out good copies of their records and finding more and more of. But so keep me in your thoughts as I hunt down Thin Lizzy records as well as XTC records and all the other records I'm going to be buying. But thank you so much for watching. Thanks for tuning into my video. Just as a side note, I have a second channel now up and running called Daily Records. There should be a link up in my description box. Anyway, Daily Records, I'm doing a different record every day. So tune into that. I hope that it's a lot of fun and that you guys get something out of it. But I'm keeping this channel going for discussions like this and to have a little bit of fun. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter. It's TommyBurton75. Like, subscribe, share, all of that good stuff. I can't say enough. When I started this channel earlier last year, I had no idea where it was going to go, but I'm so thankful for the number of you that have been watching and commenting, and also very thankful for the new friends that I've made through the channel. It's been really cool, and I can't say enough how much it means to me to know that there are other wacky record collectors out there, and I enjoy everything you guys are doing and look forward to a great 2018. I hope you all have had a wonderful holiday season, and again, thanks for watching.